Hi, everyone. Good morning. Welcome. We're just going to wait a few minutes so that most people are able to join. Oh, quite a lot of you have joined already. Welcome. So we're aiming to start latest at 10:04. Oh, like some familiar names. Hey, Kinga. So grab a cup of coffee or some tea. And we'll get started in a bit. Should have prepared some music. Unfortunately, I didn't think of that. So welcome to the ones still joining. We'll just wait a few more minutes before we get started. Already 29 of you. Great to see that. Okay, 30 numbers growing. Hi to those of you joining in the meantime. We'll get started in about 1 minute. I don't know if everyone has the thumbs up functionality for Zoom, but hopefully everyone is strapped in with the right level of caffeine this morning. I'm sorry for looking away. I have double screens. I have also my phone, so I can also follow your questions as we move along. Great, a few of you still joining. And it's 4:04, so let's get started so that we make sure we finish on time. So hi everyone, I'm Ilinka, I work for Steelcase, and thanks for joining me today to talk about prototyping the future of work. And I really want to emphasize this word, prototyping. We know that each of your organizations are in very different states of embracing and implementing hybrid work strategies. And the thing is that the bigger the leap of change, the less clear the picture of the future. Very obvious, right? But making choices on real estate assets, when they're built on a new model without any prior behavioral data, it's many times based on just very risky assumptions about how employees will react. So my call to action to you guys today is to try out new ways of working on a small scale so that you can learn and evolve and eventually make the best decisions for your people and your organization. So I'm going to emphasize this word prototyping quite a lot, and I'll also be giving you some examples about what I mean with that. So throughout the 1 hour today, I don't plan on speaking for the full 60 minutes, but for the first half at least, I'll share what we've learned from our latest global leader study. I'll also share what we've learned about how to create a hybrid work strategy. So I'll give you a summary of our own experience as Steelcase and also built in what other companies have tried or are trying. And then of course, I'll talk about space a little bit. So about the role that space can play and how you can play with space. Little wordplay there. And finally, I'll give you a glimpse into the logic of our own return to the office strategy. So as Steelcase, the things that we've actually done for ourselves. And then, of course, I'll spend some time taking your questions. And I apologize in advance. I didn't read a piece of paper that was placed in my elevator yesterday on time. So you might get some firsthand insights into my upstairs neighbor's drilling action. Hopefully the Zoom technology will prevent you from hearing it. But I had to laugh this morning because it's only fitting to talk about how to design spaces while space is literally being designed right next to me. So let's hope that that works well. So let's get started. So at Steelcase, and to those of you that have been part of business mixers or conferences where you've heard us speak, you know that we've always studied employees as well as decision makers throughout the world. And we always aim to keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening and to share our ongoing research. And since this pandemic has started, we've conducted 11 primary studies in 11 countries. We've talked to more than 52,000 people, and we've analyzed 27,000 floor plans. That's a lot of floor plans. And if I remember well, that's about 40,000 workstations. And this data set will keep growing. So I'll be honest that we're confident in our research findings, but we're also aware that none of us have ever lived through anything like this, and especially not of this magnitude. So our perceptions, people's perceptions globally may shift over time. So we're going to continue to follow that. So this is a pulse check of what is happening right now. Not saying that this is the sentiment going forward. So one thing, however, is clear, and it's not just our research, it's also research from other studies, is that hybrid work is being adopted on a large scale globally. And I think all of you on this call will resonate with that. And what I think you also resonate with is that we call it a wicked problem. So it's something that's highly complex and it's very fluid. And as each of your companies are trying to define what's right for you and for the organization, it's becoming super clear that there's no one size fits all. There's no magical solution to all of this. Hybrid is hard because it's new, partially at least. So for a lot of companies, it's new, and there's so many options. And I can imagine and felt that also firsthand that it's really daunting. And there's no crystal ball that can tell you how to get it right, and especially not how to get it right away. And I think that's something like we as humans, we need that, right? And when we're not getting it, of course, it can be very scary. But we need to accept that this is a fluid process and there's no absolutes, same as there is no one size fits all. But what we do know from our research and also from other research is that it's important to get people back to the office so they can reconnect with colleagues and leaders and begin to reestablish social capital. I spoke about this in previous presentations. It's a key foundation, so to say, for trust and for that sense of belonging that is critical for us to be able to innovate together and to help our companies grow. And the reality is that even the most leading global companies, right? You think that Google has it figured out, but even Google, even Sundar Pichai of, well, Alphabet, the mother company, sums it up very well when he says that no company, even at their scale, has ever created a fully hybrid workforce model. So it's also reassuring that nobody has it fully figured out. So going back to this global, this post-COVID global leader study that we did, there's a lot of takeaways from it, and I'll make sure that you all get the full research after the session, that you get the link. I'll emphasize only 3 of them today. A first takeaway is around mobility patterns. And almost every company that we asked, so 96% of the companies that we spoke with, say that they'll change their long-term workplace strategy in some way, right? That's still very broad, but that they will actually make a change. And the one thing I'll note here is that it's quite different from mid of last year. Sorry, not mid of last year, mid of 2020, so pre-COVID, mid-COVID. Beginning of COVID, when we all thought, okay, this is going to be a matter of months. And most companies at the time, when we were asking them, they were saying that they return to the way things were before. But I think we all thought a lot of different things when the pandemic started, and a lot of them ended up not being true, especially or primarily how long this would all take. So on top of this clear indication that workplace strategies are being revised and looked at, back then, there was also a hypothesis that many companies would shift from having a lot of real estate, so having these large corporate HQs, and would start adopting satellite spaces. So places, especially geographically kind of outside of city centers. So definitely some companies will do that. They will increase the number of employees they have in satellite spaces. And our research shows that it's about 13% up from pre-COVID. So 13% more companies are saying, yes, we're going to shift to more satellite spaces. But that's not really a massive shift in that direction. And last but not least, on this mobility topic, I'll emphasize that as the companies we've spoken to are developing their hybrid work strategies, most of them, so what is it, 31 plus 46%, so 77%, globally will allow their employees to choose either consistent in-office days or to decide daily if they're coming in the office, and only like less than a quarter will actually choose the workday for their employees. So that means that companies like your own can and should expect that there will be a need to plan for some degree of variability in the number of employees in the office on a given day. And that's I think, a struggle that a lot of companies are facing, this need to actually plan for variability in how many people are in the office. So that's one takeaway. Another takeaway is around how space will need to change. And the leaders in our study, they felt that collaboration needs to be supported more extensively going forward. And I think this is something that you've heard a lot since the pandemic started, but especially hybrid collaboration. So the kind of interactions, so the kind of teamwork where some people are in the office co-located and others are remote. And leaders are also thinking about how to adapt spaces as people come back for the different activities that they're actually needing, let's say, more of than they did in the past. So for example, that there's the right technology in spaces for small groups or individual virtual collaboration. So I'm alone in a room and I need to be on a video call with someone, or I have a small group and we need to be on a video call with someone, because this we all feel that it's increased significantly, and our research is showing that as well. And leaders are also thinking about those, lounge spaces. We call them ancillary areas that usually go underutilized, but in our new reality, they need to enable ergonomic postures and productive work, because they're a very good space for people to come together with the same expectations that they've developed working from home, where they have access to a lot more of these lounge spaces, but of course, sans the ergonomics, for those of you that have ever tried working from your couch for longer periods of time. So that's another takeaway. A third one would be around experimenting, and that it's really key, and that basically most companies are thinking about doing it. So more than half of the organizations in our study are saying that they're planning on running significant pilots. And less than 6%, which is a very small percentage, are saying no pilots at all. So pilots are a really great way to include employees and to have them participate in the process, so you can actually learn what really works, as opposed to what I was saying at the beginning, kind of building everything on assumptions about employees' expectations that might turn out not to be the right ones. But you need to, of course, be prepared to pivot as you learn, and I'll share some ideas about ways in which you can do low risk but high gain pilots moving forward. Then a final insight, that it's not from our study, so I only shared the 3, but it's from McKinsey research, shows that most companies don't actually have a detailed plan communicated or even in place at the moment. But as you can see from the data, it's clear that a lot of thinking is actually happening right now on this topic, which makes perfect sense. Now at Steelcase, we've practiced hybrid work for nearly a decade. So I've always worked in a hybrid way since I joined 8 years ago, I think. So we have all these years of learnings of things that work well for us and also things that didn't. So of course, every organization is different, but I'll share with you what we've learned from ourselves about creating a hybrid work strategy. First of all, and here it's, a lot of you probably have already experienced this, is that there will be plenty of discussions about how it will be structured, of course, and there will be a lot of differences of opinion. Some companies prefer people to be in the office a lot, other less so. There's these examples from the US of CEOs saying, if you can go to the restaurant, you can also come to the office. I think it was Morgan Stanley, if I'm not mistaken. Many leaders also feel that people actually do their best work when they're in the office, so they have that expectations. And then we as employees need the office to actually support all these new ways of work that we are engaging in. And it needs to be a magnet that will attract us back every day. Because if you don't remember at this stage, you've probably been in 1,000 Zoom calls on this topic, but one of the first things we were sharing at the beginning of the pandemic was what people were saying they liked the most about working from home. And that was the lack of commute. So I see a few people that I know on the call that live in Bucharest, and you're probably nodding as I'm speaking. So lack of commute was really an important thing we loved about staying at home, but that also means that the experience that we have in the office needs to make it worth us re-engaging in that commute. And that doesn't go to say that some commutes can be nice, of course, but generally speaking, that's what the sentiment was at the beginning of the pandemic. So there'll be a lot of discussion, but the kind of North Star or the guiding principle going forward to develop a successful hybrid strategy is really around balancing the needs between individuals, teams, and the organization. Sounds obvious, but it's quite complex and quite difficult to achieve this balance. And that will require leaders to work in unknown territory and to test different working hypotheses, because there's not one right answer and it will be different between companies. But of course, for you, it's relevant to understand how you can determine what the right balance is for your organization. And the first step here, or the most important first step here, is to decide where and how people will work. This is key information as you plan what needs to change about the office. And ideally, you need to know how many people will be in each of these categories that you see on the screen, because of course, the number of hybrid and remote workers impacts sharing ratios for unassigned desking, for example. And I emphasize this challenge again, that office utilization rates will vary as this is being refined, let's say, and sometimes significantly, because people will need time to adjust and experiment. And knowing that the choice predominantly will be with employees, this needs to be taken into account. So that means you need a lot of flexible space to make it easy to accommodate people, even on days when everyone decided they need to be in the office. And traditionally, as you all, of course, have experienced in your careers, offices have been planned so that each person gets their own desk, of course. That, of course, has shifted over the last decade, but generally speaking, that's still been the way forward. So to design a mobility strategy for a hybrid workplace, as opposed to a traditional one, you need to determine what degree of mobility is right for both your people and the organization. So going back to this balance between the individual and the group. And there's many factors here to consider. Of course, this is, these are the high strokes. This is a summary. Things like the type of culture you want, that's a huge complex topic in itself. And I think at the conference in November, we'll dive a bit deeper into that. So the type of culture you want, what the job requires. So is this even something that can be done in multiple places? How suitable somebody is personally for mobile work, like are they mobile? Is their personal situation conducive to being mobile? And what I'll really emphasize here is that you should never approach mobility kind of ad hoc. You really need a clear policy to support it, a change management strategy, and especially if this is new for people, training resources, and last but not least, as much as possible, kind of reliable data around workplace utilization, because that's what will help inform decisions going forward and kind of capture what you've tested and set a benchmark for it for the future. And we have to be very mindful that hybrid work will be a big change for many, not for all, right? Many companies have been working in hybrid for quite some time. I was listening to the Skanska panel the other day. So a company like HP has been working like this for quite some time, but still the large majority of organizations, for them, it will be still a big change. So it's important to have a strategy in place that helps everyone feel engaged, involved in the process, and very importantly, kind of really understanding why decisions are being made and why it matters. Because most of the time we're just sharing our individual need, but we're not really necessarily realizing what the impact of that individual need will have on the organization. So we'd highly recommend having change management champions. So these are people who embrace, create, and inspire change, and they're key for whether it's a spatial change, a process change, whatever it is. Having champions is always very, very important. It's also key to create inclusion at all levels. So to have a range of change activities from small and powerful targeted things to actually enterprise-wide initiatives. And on the panel yesterday, a lot of these kinds of initiatives were mentioned. And you also need to, let's say, meet people where they are in terms of what type of information they need. So some people want very just the broad strokes, like give me the highlights, give me the general view. Other people want really specific information. Where they want to receive it. Is it what kind of medium, right? Is it emails? Is it signage? How are you communicating what you're communicating? And how are you actually engaging them? Are you doing pilots? Are you doing surveys, workshops? Is it blogs? So what is the medium in which you are not only informing, but also involving people? And last but not least, new behaviors need to be cultivated. So as soon as you activate change, you need to cultivate that change through, here, very powerful, our workshop experiences, where whatever seed of change you've exposed, you're actually continuously cultivating it throughout the process. But the hybrid workplace is definitely a bit more complex than the traditional office when it comes to landing, to kind of deciding on very detailed space requirements. Mobility patterns, I talked about that a little bit, will tell you some of the necessary or the critical elements, but you will also need to understand how people work and the types of things that they do each day. So everyone needs to collaborate to some extent, but some teams spend a considerable amount of time working this way. We also need to make sure that there's places where people can focus, because this was a major issue when working from home, at least for those type of personas that did not have the right level of physical privacy or acoustic privacy or psychological privacy at home. And we also shouldn't forget that people also need to socialize, to learn and rejuvenate. So this, the two pillars of mobility patterns and modes of work are equally important when actually defining space requirements. So the reality is we need to do all of this because yes, there's people that cannot wait to return to the office and be with their colleagues again, but some are more tentative or some are simply, I love this word, it's unenthused. So some people are definitely the opposite of enthusiastic about coming back. And to get people to come back, of course, the space needs to feel compelling. And that's another fancy word for convincing. And that really means more than just beautiful or aesthetically pleasing, or it's more than just the personality of the space. That space really has to help people work in new ways. It needs to actually attract them to the office. And here, I think it's especially in areas where talent is in high demand. And I think the ABSL, the industry that ABSL represents, is definitely one where talent is in high demand. So this is not a time to have an office that people don't want to work in. So it needs to attract people, but it also needs to help them engage in their work and engage with the organization. So compelling space needs to be dynamic, so changeable, to create energy and inspire people and enable them to actually be productive. And I want to go deeper in the next minutes on two types of spaces that we believe are going to be particularly important for companies who are doing hybrid work. And those are social hubs and hybrid collaboration spaces. And I'm going to take a quick moment to check the chat because I haven't done so yet to see if there are any questions. No questions so far. Hopefully most of you are still with me. So I'll start with social spaces. Maybe before that, just to really drill in the point, just a reminder about this mindset of experimentation and of prototyping as you're starting your journey towards hybrid work, and being mindful that new policies or new processes or new spaces will work and others will need to be tweaked, and some just need to be thrown in the bin, right? They need to be abandoned moving forward. And that the office itself really should be a place of trying new things, of learning and adjusting. And here, flexible and mobile furniture will make it easier to do that, but especially when you're playing with it in underutilized spaces. And especially if those spaces are spaces that people will see when they enter. So they will be a signal of like, ding, ding, there's something new, there's something engaging, there's something that you need to express your opinion about. So little parenthesis as a reminder, but back to social hubs. So social hubs are a name we've given to a type of space that really helps either people who are coming back and need to rebuild connections because they've lost that connection over time, or it's spaces that can help organizations who want to create a more dynamic culture and boost collaboration. So that as a shift from how it was even before COVID. And these kinds of spaces should be designed to be very visible and to help create vibrancy and this like buzz and energy that we're missing. And it's also a way to collaborate in open settings. And I mentioned already that can make currently underutilized spaces work even harder for your organization and also help each individual be productive. So they should be created in central areas, so they become a gathering place where you can both work, but also work on that sense of community and belonging, because both are work, community and belonging. It's not on job descriptions, but it's a crucial thing to help companies be successful. And when I say social hubs, I don't mean just one type of space. It's kind of a multitude of settings that are all flexible and high performing, that give you different privacy levels and that support the different modes of work that I've mentioned before. So give people the ability to focus, collaborate, learn, rejuvenate, as well as socialize. And yes, rejuvenation is definitely a work mode. Again, not one that's on job descriptions, but one that our brain actually needs so that it can do all the other things that I mentioned. So these spaces should be desirable destinations where teams want to collaborate when they're in the office for two key reasons. First of all, because they're flexible enough to adapt to them, so to expand when there's more people or to contract when there are less people in the office. And very importantly, because we shouldn't forget that not everyone has the same level of comfort, that spaces like this will feel more comfortable to people who are stressed about being in a meeting room, about being in an enclosed space. And I'm sure there's still plenty of such personas out there, and rightfully so, because we're definitely not out of this situation. And you can create these kinds of spaces in many areas of your office, of course, but a company's cafeteria is generally a really good place to experiment, especially when you're trying to figure out how to get people back and how to boost morale and engagement, because most of the time they're empty, or at least they're empty for a part of the day. They're, of course, designed to help us eat, to support dining, and sometimes maybe for individual work, but most of the time, most of the day, these spaces sit empty, which means that a pilot to design a social hub can be very much low risk. It doesn't have to cost a lot, but it can be really high gain, because not only does it bring people together to help rebuild these relationships and this feeling of belonging, but it also gives you this high performance collaboration space in the open. And I think for me, at least, spaces like this, they're also very helpful for me to see what others are working on, especially if I don't have planned interactions with you. So let's say our engineering teams at Steelcase, I do not talk to them on a regular basis, but actually seeing what they're working on, because they are in an open area, will help me regain the touch that I've lost during the pandemic. And again, it's all about flexibility, which enables you to not make any architectural changes and very quickly implement a space like this without having to change walls or do any of that. So I'm not showing you our own pilots today, because I think there's always a context to these things, right? It's not just about showing an image. So if you want to learn more about our own social hub pilots, we would love to welcome you either in Cluj or in Munich, physically or virtually, to give you that right level of context as to why this social pilot and why there and who we expect to use it, etc. So alongside this idea of social hubs, we also need to think about how to design spaces differently to support this blended hybrid collaboration, however we want to call it. So those moments when some of us are physically in a room together and others are remote. And this is it's always been a pretty complex design problem, and it will feel very complex now because it will feel very different from when all of us were constantly at home. We were all working the same way, using the same platform, like most of us actually are today for this specific purpose. But as we each start to be co-located with some and in a remote environment with others, we really need to make sure that the experience is good for people on both sides of the camera. And as a person that is usually not co-located, because my team is not co-located with me, this one is very important to me. So people will be even more than ever in these blended video meetings, either because the company itself has decided to go hybrid, or because externally you are working with companies that are hybrid themselves. So video is going to happen almost everywhere in the office, no longer just in these enclosed dedicated spaces, but it's also starting to happen a lot in open areas, which means that we kind of need to think a little bit like movie directors and think about the lighting, the camera, action, the audio experience, and the content that we're sharing. And this is a pretty fundamental shift in the way that work actually happens. So I think it's fair to admit that some ways of collaborating can be doable or okay when everyone is remote. So what we call informative collaboration. So when I'm just sharing an update or sharing status reports, it can be okay on video, but it's still very difficult to understand people's reactions or to read the room. So even now, technically this at the moment is a very informative collaboration type of engagement, but I have no clue if you're sleeping, having coffee, or if you're laughing at my attempts at joking throughout this presentation. So that's informative collaboration, right? Can be done when everyone is remote, but when you think about generative collaboration, where the objective is to develop new ideas and to solve problems, that's a lot harder to do when everyone is remote, because it requires people to more actively engage with content. So whiteboards, post-its, etc. So a hybrid collaboration space has to help us in the different range of collaborative activities that we engage in, whether it's for more social gatherings, whether it's this generative collaboration that I mentioned, or whether it's learning, for example, which is something that, especially if you've joined the company during the pandemic, you know more than ever how difficult that is in a remote environment. Not on every aspect, right? You can still take an online course, but learning is much more than that. And there's let's say a whole hour I can talk about informal learning, but I'll just leave it at that. So a hybrid collaboration space should therefore support both small and large groups, give the ability or give access to enclosed and open spaces, and definitely have a range of acoustic properties. And a lot of the leaders we interviewed in the global leader study, and that's not one of the statistics I showed, but they were saying that they're going to rely a lot on people's individual devices, so laptops and phones, but that means that spaces need to be designed so that we can both use our own device, but then also together with the integrated technology in the room. I know that all of us can probably make our own memes about connecting to beamers and to screens and things like that, but the expectation is now that this is a lot more seamless, because the experience in a remote environment has enabled us to see how to experience how seamless it can be to actually collaborate remotely. And when we're back in the office, we're going to have the same expectation. Now, and this is kind of the last framework that I'll show, is that throughout the years where we've learned from our own experience and our own research how to support teams across multiple locations and different time zones, we've dissected or synthesized what we've learned into 3 key principles that are helping us, and hopefully will help you to guide the creation of spaces that will help make hybrid a better experience for everyone. And those 3 are equity, engagement, and ease. So I'll dive a little bit into all 3 of them. So equity is all about doing our best, so striving for inclusion despite location. So the design goal here is really to eliminate the gap of not being co-located. And perhaps this still sounds a little bit sci-fi, but there's quite a few things that we can do without having some crazy technology at our disposal to ensure equity. One of them is to enable both the remote and the co-located participants to move around the room, so that the remote person or the remote people are not always kind of on stage next to the content. And for this, mobile furniture and mobile virtual displays can, of course, support. And then if you're in a group discussion that is shifting through the space, you can always pull up the virtual display up to the table instead of leaving that person kind of on stage, like I mentioned before, and basically kind of disconnected from the little campfire that you've built. Another way to ensure equity is to use both shared and individual devices. And I touched upon this before, and that's especially important when you have a new team. So of course you have the shared device, you have the screen that everyone is looking at, where hopefully the content and the person are have different places on this device, but giving this range of devices, so having both the individual and the shared one, makes the experience more equitable, because all the remote people can then actually see each individual in the remote session and read their facial expression. So what I mean is that every remote participant can see the room on a big screen, but can also see each person individually, as opposed to like, oh, hey, Bob, is that you? And squinting to see who is where in the room, which most of the time is still how things are currently happening. Another way to ensure equity is to help people to both look and feel confident on video. So here lighting is key. So the on-camera lighting is very different from the lighting that you need like for your workstation, so from task lighting. For on-camera, you need warm, intense LED lights that are a little higher than your head and a little off to the side. So definitely not the case in my living room at the moment, but I think if you've experienced good lighting in a video environment, you know exactly what I mean, but this is a very important component to equity. Then we also should consider the size of the space, the boundaries, the materials, and the direction of the microphone and speakers. So I said a lot of words here, right? So it's really about how you engineer the space so that you have the best possible audio on both ends. But best possible audio doesn't mean complete silence, right? It also should mean including some, but not too much background noise. Because if you imagine a completely silent experience, your brain actually interprets this as uncomfortable or wrong. Some people find it soothing. There's these things, I think they're called floating devices, where you go into a little container, and so sound deprivation can be therapeutic to some extent, but most of the time our brain is like, oh Lord, what's happening? This feels wrong. It's because it's atypical. So having some noise is comforting, and that's something that technology can actually help with. And last but not least, and I mentioned like that mobility, for example, should not be an ad hoc decision. In the case of equity, it's very important to have intentional and clearly communicated etiquette and protocols. And I think this was also a bit of a discussion point in the Skanska panel yesterday. So for example, very simple thing, marking where the microphone is in the room so that you know it's intuitive, you don't need to deal with this every time, that everyone can actually hear and be heard. Or making sure that you're spending the first few minutes of every meeting on the social aspects, on the social chatter that allows you to build relationships. So that's a little bit about equity. And this is a very important one, because the last thing we need is to create an environment of haves and have-nots. And for each company, it might be a little bit different, like who's the have and who's the have-not, the at home or the in the office person. But designing for equity in terms of hybrid collaboration spaces is definitely one way to reduce that gap or the chance of that perception. Then next to equity, there's engagement. We also need to design for engagement, which means making sure that things are a little bit human. And the irony is that technology actually can help with that. So a camera's viewing range can make things seem more natural or human, as well as all the content creation tools that we use. So making sure that everyone has an equal access to the digital and the analog information that they're using. For me, the most annoying thing is when I'm remote, my team is co-located and they're using a whiteboard that I cannot see. It's a very frustrating feeling, but there's a relatively easy fix to that in terms of space design to make sure that doesn't happen. And then it's also about how you arrange the people, whether it's the remote or the local people, and how you arrange that content to ensure that equal participation. And of course, there's technology, there's software platforms and the integrated technology systems that allow you to have these multiple monitors where you have person and content separately, which makes things a little bit more engaging for everyone. Like you're giving the person a seat at the table in a more human way. So that's a little bit about engagement. And last but not least, it might be equitable, it might be super engaging, but if it's not easy, people won't do it. So that means we also need to make sure that we have a variety of intuitive virtual and physical experiences that are very easy to navigate. this can mean, in a very basic way, just making sure that we can do simple and seamless transitions across the different devices that we're using. So from the personal device to the shared device. It means we need to make sure that the remote and the co-located participants can see each other properly and can see the content properly. So have clear sight of lines. And here, of course, the flexibility of furniture and mobile devices will enable you to actually move co-located participants and give them perhaps not the best view, but at least as good of a view as everyone has in the room physically. Last but not least, it's also about the range of technology experiences that should work together and pair with the different software solutions. So the Zoom versus Teams, right? Your company might favor one platform, but a lot of us are also making a lot of external connections. So we need to be sure that we have access to a variety of solutions, both internally and externally. So that's a bit about equity, engagement, and ease. There's really a lot to say about this. I wanted to give you a bit of a highlight just to prime you or to make sure that you take away these three things when you're thinking about what hybrid collaboration spaces will look like in the future. And the reality is that there's many, many ways to design a social hub or to design a hybrid collaboration space. And I want to come back to my introduction and throughout the session, of course, where I was emphasizing the word prototyping. Making choices on real estate when you don't have behavioral data and you're basing everything on assumptions of how employees will react is risky. If there's one thing that I would like you to take away from this, it's this statement. It's risky if we haven't tested how people will actually react and we haven't made a decision taking that into account, and it's purely assumption-based. So I really, really, really encourage you to try out new ways of working on a small scale so you can learn, evolve, and eventually make the best decisions for your people and, of course, for your companies. And don't forget that there's no single correct hybrid work strategy. It doesn't exist. So as a final part of my presentation, I want to give you a very brief glimpse into how we are doing it at Steelcase. So the hybrid work model that we're applying to ourselves. But before I do that, I will check the Q&A. Oh, great. So, Costin, I think it's you that I was referencing a little bit from the Skanska panel. I see your question. What are the most interesting hybrid work projects you've worked on in Romania? What were some noteworthy hybrid space transformation examples you've seen on the local market? So there's some examples that I could give you, but I wouldn't be able to give you the company name at this stage. What I would say is that at the moment, we've tested a lot on ourselves, but we're not really at the stage where we're seeing that transformation. So we're at the stage now where the thinking about that transformation has started. So I do not have a concrete example to give you of an actual space transformation. There's some examples that I can give you about the thinking process of companies in that direction. But I think you as a company, as HPE, could share perhaps your own view on this. I don't know if you can open your microphone, Costin. Is that possible, Andrea?
I will try now. Just a moment. Can you raise the hand, Costin? I don't see you. No, I think he left. He question and left.
Oh, okay, the question was asked about 10 minutes ago, so I'm sorry about that. So to answer Costin's questions, I don't have one example to give you at the moment because this transformation has basically just started, right? And showing you a space will not be enough. It's really about the context of how companies are really rethinking the overall transformation. The discussions that we're having right now and the projects that we are engaged in Romania are really at the stage of how do we define what that social contract is that I want to engage in with my employees. So what are those individual needs of companies that what are the individual needs of people that I need to take into account? And then what does the company actually need? What is the purpose of community? What is that balance between the individual and the collective that we need to achieve? So at the moment in Romania, we do not have active pilots outside of our own space in Cluj, where I warmly invite you to envision what that is, but we are having a lot of conversations about how to bridge that gap. And I think the example around the Steelcase return to the office plan is a step in that direction, because even ourselves, we are exactly in that phase of defining what a pilot would look like. Any other questions? Because I think Costin's question was the only one that I was seeing. No. Then I'll just spend the last few minutes sharing a little bit about what we're doing at Steelcase. So our expect phase started on September 27th. So that's basically just last week. Before that, we were in what we called invite, and then we went into encourage. So depending on how the vaccination rates were evolving, and of course how the pandemic was evolving, but now we are in a phase that we're calling expect. I know it's a strong word, but let me explain what that means. So our principle for hybrid work at Steelcase is quite simple, and it's that we spend more time in the office than working remotely. And the general guideline that we've given employees, whose roles, of course, can accommodate remote work, of course, we also have factories, so that won't work, is that 60% of the time is spent in the office and 40% of the time is spent remotely. So that could mean 3 days per week in the office and 2 days remote. And the reasoning for this principle is that we fundamentally believe in the power of place and human connection to what we call unlock human promise, to actually enable people to work in a better way. And creating social connections is what really helps our teams to collaborate more effectively and to create better results. And I think a lot of us have thought this at the moment, and some of us are probably still thinking this, that it's true that we are able to complete, or most of us are able to complete what we need to do from home, so our assigned tasks. But what we're less able to do is to build missing bridges to other teams and to projects, or to foster the cohesion that actually makes teams work together. So spending time in the office for us, it enables us to have moments, we really call them moments also, or micro moments internally, to build and maintain relationships. And it gives us the opportunity to ask questions, of course, but not in a planned way, but you see someone, you ask them a question, to help somebody that needs it, to have a very informal, light-hearted interaction with someone, or to just have a laugh. And at least for me, next week I'll be in Munich. It's also will help me to physically be there so I can bring up and resolve some delicate topics, which the remote environment will not really have done justice for. So the sum of these micro moments that I mentioned, for us, that's really the glue that holds our company together. And in coming together, we're building this context, we're building the connections and the community that in turn feeds our collective creativity and our success. And the thing that we're sharing internally and that we're truly believing in is that we don't go to the office only for ourselves. We also go for each other. And I think that that's a very powerful thing to keep in mind, because especially as we started on this journey, it was always really about the individual need. So it's not just for ourselves, it's also for each other. But the key to make that work for everyone is flexibility. And this 60-40 guideline, because it really is a guideline, it does give the flexibility for our own employees to exercise choice and control about where they're working based on what they're doing, but it also requires flexibility from each of us towards the needs of our teams and the business when we make the choice to come to the office or to stay at home. So we know that there will be very unique situations, so where more flexibility is needed because everyone has their own circumstances. And for that, we've developed what we call a return to the office playbook. And so-called flexibility agreements. So that will help employees and managers identify what the right solution is for each individual circumstance. But what I want to show you is just an example of something we're actually using internally to help clarify this difference between choice and control and where a discussion or a flexibility agreement would be appropriate. So for example, if I say I'm going to stay at home today or tomorrow because I predominantly need to do focus work, that's totally within my choice and control. But if I'm making a permanent decision that, okay, from now on, I'm always at home on Wednesday and on Friday, that would definitely require discussion. And I think it's intuitive why. So me being always away on Wednesday and Friday could potentially hinder the development of those that want to learn from me that are in the office, perhaps on some Wednesdays and some Fridays. It can slow down innovation and problem solving because something that I could just be asked ad hoc now requires emailing or calling, etc. It might even prevent the retention of colleagues, right? If my social bond with some people diminishes and their social bond with many people diminish, that can also impact retention, right? You might leave a company because we know how important having relationships at work is for staying in a company. And before COVID, a lot of our employees were really putting in a lot of effort and time to build this rapport and to support each other. Even though this part of work, I think I hinted at this before, it's not really super valued or it's not necessarily recognized in job descriptions, but it's key. And to create and maintain relationships in a hybrid environment where it's even more costly because of time and energy and the emotional investment that it takes to maintain a relationship that is super remote, makes us want to really invest the time to make sure that the culture work actually happens, that we actually intentionally create the systems that we need to nurture the culture that we want to happen. So the next 3 months, right, it only started last week, which is why I don't have our tangible pilots to share at the moment, but I'm just setting you on a journey and kicking off the moment in our journey where our testing has started. So for the next 3 months, we're going to test how culture, tools, processes, and space can come together to define what different flexibility agreements would actually look like and how this 60-40 thing is working, what the impact is on individual needs, on the feeling of community, etc. So I'll just leave you with this question, and hopefully there will be more questions from your side, even though at the moment I don't see any. I leave you with this question of how will you test or experiment in the near future? And of course, we're here to share our experience and help, being mindful that everything is very contextual. There's no one size fits all. It's really about the mobility strategy and the work modes in your company that will determine how you should test or you should experiment. So thank you very much for joining. I hope this was useful, or it got you thinking, especially about this question, and I'll see if any other questions will come. And I'll make sure to reach out to Costin separately to make sure I don't leave his question unanswered. Anyone? I didn't check the chat. I only checked the Q&A. Andrea, is there anything on the chat? Oh, thank you, very helpful. Thank you for the feedback, Christina. So if there are no questions, then a 5-minute gift of time for everyone, and feel free to reach out if you want to see how the next 3 months work for us, and if you want to hear more about the pilots that we're applying to ourselves. Have a great day, everyone.